While you were presenting, we received several questions. So if you want, we can also share with you some of them, or at least or all of them. So if a tutti i partecipanti, se volete continuare a fare domande, le condivideremo più tardi via mail con Rob, e quindi continuate pure a scrivere. In the meantime, sorry for switching back to English. In the meantime, I can show you the most voted ones. So the first one is, as imagination could be a privilege, how can we make imagination possible for all or for many? So yeah, so I mean, we need space, we need pacts, and we need these practices, but what if the imagination is not somehow allowed because we have constraints? So how can we make it possible for all?
Yeah, I think we have to recognize that that it has to be done very consciously. You know, one example of it is that in the UK now, if you go to a private school, a school that you pay for, they have amazing libraries and art rooms, and you do drama and you do creative writing and you do painting. But if you go to a government school, that stuff is now all seen as being completely irrelevant. It's all about maths and English and science, and there's no room for that at all. So we have to, I think, one of the ideas that I put in the book is that we need a national imagination act. We have to recognize that we have to create the conditions for this, and it has to be done intentionally, because when the government imposes austerity on a society, it is an attack on the imagination of the most vulnerable people in that society. You close the libraries, you defund the arts, you cut all of that stuff away as somehow being irrelevant. And at a time of a climate and ecological emergency, it's an even more dangerous and stupid thing to do. So I think we have to look at education, we have to look at policy making, we have to look at everybody, that imagination as being a universal right, and creating the conditions in which people can live an imaginative life is really important. So as I said, I think a universal basic income is one really important strategy, because it gives people that space. A 4-day working week gives people that space. Unless we create the intentional conditions of it for it, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, thanks for that as well. I think that there's also some disparity that we have to always keep in mind, because as privileged already, it's very hard to imagine and empathize also with people that might not have the same possibilities. So having an infrastructure that helps us and allows us equally, as you said, universally to access to this privilege, it's fundamental.
Yes, and also I would add, you know, we have to recognize that systemic racism and economic inequality are also profoundly toxic to the imagination, I think. And there's some writers of color who are doing some really interesting work on that at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. So perhaps also this second question can also help. How can you tell if what if question is good enough and inclusive enough? So if we can imagine a world where, for example, we are able and we are allowed to imagine, but then how can we actually tell whether our what if question is inclusive, if is inclusive enough, and if we're encompassing all the needs of all different people?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think one of the ways is by ensuring that the process that produces that what if question is inclusive from the beginning. And I work with some people who run a training called The Art of Invitation, which is brilliant, which is all about how to do really good invitations. You know, how to make sure the right people will come. And, you know, in my earlier days as an activist, I would think it was enough to just say, we're going to have an event, we'll make a poster, we'll put it up, and the people will come, and then that's the event. The Art of Invitation says, you should spend 40% of the time and energy and resource of the event on the invitation, on making sure that you get the right people in the room and explicitly inviting those people, 20% on the event itself, and then the other 40% then on digesting what happened and then sharing that back out to everybody. So I also think one of the ways you can tell a good what if question is that there is then an energy for it. Like if it's something that people just go meh, then it's not a great what if question. A good what if question for me should be like, there was that guy who used to be the mayor of Bogota in Colombia said a good what if question is like writing the first half of a really audacious question on a blackboard and then respecting people's capacity to complete that sentence themselves. And so that's something I think where when you hit a good what if question, you can tell because there's a kind of an energy to it.
It's attracting people. But then my question would be following up this question would be, okay, but if let's say I didn't make the invitation so well, so if I cannot reach as many people as possible and I can only reach the ones that I know, or a very, you know, constrained or at least limited amount of people that have some limited let's say characteristics, but then I'm leaving out some other people that might have other characteristics and that I don't know of. How can I really reach out to them then?
So one example for me would be I'm very involved in a project in my town, which is the most ambitious community-led development project in the country, where the community is becoming its own developer. So that project started with a group of 5 people, you know, and it started because this empty factory became available and we began campaigning. And then as we campaigned, at every step of the campaign, we were saying, who should be here? Who needs to be here? We would design events to reach to different people, And then when we came to the point of doing the consultation, we designed a consultation that in a town of 9,000 people heard contributions from 4,500 people for what should happen there. So you design the process as you go along. There's a beautiful term people start to use in the UK now about building an imagination infrastructure. You know, we designed that project so we would build an imagination infrastructure for the town where there was regular consultations. We said, we have no idea what will happen in this place. Anything could happen here. My ideas is just 1/9,000th of what could happen here. And we ran it as a process that really invited people's imagination in a really deep way, because it was clear that every round of consultation would shape what happened, and their ideas were just as important as anybody else's. So you don't have to start perfect. You evolve as you go, and you invite and you welcome as you go along.
Yeah, also this fact that there is no judgment and everybody can be heard and has the same right to say their own perspective.
Yeah, and that boils down to facilitation and good facilitation. I always think, you know, Gil Scott-Heron did that very famous song in the 70s, "The revolution will not be televised." I think now it would be the revolution will be well facilitated. And we absolutely need to be training on every course in every university, everywhere, people with good community facilitation skills, because they are learnable and they're so important.
That's a great suggestion. We have also, apart from us, but we also have other teachers and professors that are among the public. So guys, take notes. We have to also teach how to facilitate and learn ourselves how to facilitate also in class, and allow different perspective from different students to just give their voice. Another question that came from the public was, how can imagination lead the development of inclusive scenarios? So you spoke mainly about, you know, more sustainable futures, and within the big umbrella of sustainability, we also have this social inclusivity. and so on and so forth. But being in a world where we continuously hear about like the terms of inclusivity, and this term has also evolved during the years, how do you think we can lead the development through imagination of this more inclusive scenario?
So I think there's a lot of work and learning about that going on within the transition movement, for example, at the moment, and it's something that has to be done really, really consciously, and trying to really maximize the diversity of voices that are included, and the diversity of perspectives that are reflected, and I know a lot of transition groups very actively do that kind of work. And for example, there was Transition Town Tooting, who I mentioned in the presentation, who are in a very, very diverse part of London. One of the first things they did was to go and visit. They did a very high profile event where they went around and visited all the different places of worship in their community to hear their stories about what their faith's teachings are in relation to the environment and to taking care of the world. They did a big event called the Tooting Trash Catchers Carnival, which was a massive street carnival about waste, which involved about 2,000 people from different organizations, different mosques, different temples. Everything was made out of trash, and it was an incredible community event. And they build off that, building more and more relationships. I think when you're working at a community scale, you need to be building those connections to different groups and always inviting people and making events. I think it's like it's a bit like with a coral reef in the ocean. How do you make a coral reef? You can't breed coral, but you need to put something there that the coral can gravitate to and settle on. In the same way, the project I mentioned here in Totnes, we have designed that project so that many different groups and organizations can be drawn to it. So the inclusive design is also about creating the projects that community can organize around. We started a brewery here in my town. If you ever come, you must come and have a drink. It's the best beer in all of Britain. And from the beginning, the intention with that project was that to build community around that business. So everything that we do, we have a membership. And then when we wanted to expand that business, we didn't go to the bank. We went to that community of people because they felt included. They felt it was their business. So there's lots of things we can do like that.
That's great. And I think also the public and the audience will agree that this key takeaway about like creating this infrastructure and creating the project towards everyone gravitates, it's something that we can definitely take home. Another aspect, and this will be the last question because then we will run out of time, I think. It's something that many could be sharing, since we as a community are people that could come from organizations. So one question would be, how can we communicate the importance of imagination within an organization that is anchored to the present or the very near future performance and look for quick solutions normally? So we know that we have several consultants, and we have several employees of maybe corps, and sometimes organizations are really pushing for quick results, quick solutions, quick performances. So how can we leverage on, or at least let's say underline the importance of imagination also within this organizations?
I think we have to so the few things. Firstly, I would start with the values and the ethics of the organization already. Yeah. And so many organizations will say we have ethics around community and the environment, but actually how do those ethics sit alongside the fact that this is a climate and ecological emergency? Are we moving fast enough? Are we acting as if this is an emergency? Are we acting as an organization that is responsible for the long-term stewardship of the world? So that's a lot of the thing that I do, and try to work with organizations to say, declare emergency. You know, you've just been dealing with the emergency of COVID, and you've had to change so many things about how this organization works. Climate change demands the same thing, but on a much more profound scale. So I did some work recently, for example, with Patagonia, the clothing company, where they were very aware that the conversation within the organization was, are we acting as an organization as if this was a climate emergency? And if not, how would we behave differently if we did recognize that was the case? And so I did a 2-day workshop with them in the mountains, and really trying to getting them to play and to think about things in very different ways. And one of the things that I brought to that conversation that was really powerful, I think, was we did what we called a walk of what if, where they went out in groups of 6 out into the mountains with the invitation to come up with as many different what if questions for Patagonia as they could, under this umbrella of what if in everything that it did, Patagonia acted as if this was a climate and ecological emergency. And I said to them, there are 2 rules for this exercise. One is, don't be constrained by what already exists. Forget the 5-year strategic plan or whatever. The second thing was, no one is allowed to say yes, but. When somebody suggests a what if question, you can only respond by saying yes, and, where you take the other person's idea and you add something, you build, and then they add, and then you build something else. Because so many people's experience in organizations is that they bring great ideas and they get met with yes, but. And yes, but is like the death of the imagination. So to cultivate a culture of yes, and a more playful culture, I think is one of the most important things that we can do. But for me, it starts with what Extinction Rebellion called tell the truth. You know, declaring a climate emergency and being really clear about where we are in history, and that business as usual is not an option anymore. Absolutely not an option anymore. So we can either choose to try and ignore that, or we can embrace that with great enthusiasm, with yes, and with playfulness and imagination.
Okay, so thank you for this very interesting first presentation, but also for this Q&A session. I think that this is a shared opinion that we thank you so much for your contribution, and also for the insights that you brought to us. They were super refreshing, and we have definitely some things to work on still. And perhaps we will create also our own transition town, who knows? All together, the transition town of design thinking. And so thank you again. If you want, and if you want to stay, you're more than welcome, of course. And afterwards,
I think I go and feed my family. Ma grazie. Buonasera a tutti. Grazie. Ciao.
Okay, thanks.
Arrivederci.
Grazie. Thank
Prego.